Hello everyone. In this session, I will demonstrate you the attachments on the humerus. In my last video, I demonstrated you the general features and how to determine the site of the humerus. Now coming to the attachments, first the capsular ligament of the shoulder joint. We saw last time that the head of the humerus articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula and forms a shoulder joint. So this is the shoulder joint. The capsular ligament of the shoulder joint is attached around the anatomical neck. Except that on a medial side, the line of attachment extends about 2 cm below and includes a part of shaft also, then again attached round the anatomical neck. Also, in the region of the bicipital groove or intertubercular sulcus, there is an aperture along the line of attachment of capsular ligament for the tendon of long head of biceps to pass through. Second is the attachment of capsular ligament of the elbow joint. The line of attachment passes above coronoid fossa, radial fossa. Literally, the line of attachment passes between capitulum and little epicondyle. Posteriorly, it passes above olecranon fossa. And then, it passes between medial epicondyle and trochlea. And back to its attachment anteriorly. So this is the attachment of capsular ligament of elbow joint. Now coming to the muscles, the lesser tubercle receives insertion of subscapularis muscle. On the posterior aspect of greater tubercle there are 3 impressions. The uppermost impression receives insertion of supraspinatus. The middle impression receives insertion of infraspinatus, and the lowermost impression receives insertion of teres minor muscle. So there are 3 muscles inserted on the posterior aspect of greater tubercle: supraspinatus, infraspinatus and teres minor. The floor of the bicipital groove receives insertion of latissimus dorsi muscle. The lateral lip of the bicipital groove receives insertion of pectoralis major muscle. And the medial lip of bicipital groove receives insertion of teres major muscle. The structures which pass through the intertubercular sulcus are the tendon of long head of biceps, which is going from above downward along with its synovial sheath, and the ascending branch of anterior circumflex humeral artery, which is ascending up within the bicipital groove. There is a deltoid tuberosity on the anterolateral surface, which receives insertion of deltoid muscle. The middle of the medial border receives insertion of coracobrachialis muscle. The lower halves of anteromedial and anterolateral surfaces use origin to brachialis muscle. Coming to the posterior surface, the part of the posterior surface above the radial groove use origin to the lateral head of triceps brachii muscle, and the part of the posterior surface below the radial groove use origin to medial head of triceps brachii muscle. The medial epicondyle use origin to the 5 superficial flexor muscles of front of forearm. So this origin is also known as common flexor origin. Similarly, the lateral epicondyle use origin to the superficial extensor muscles of the back of forearm. So this origin is also known as common extensor origin. Coming to the lateral supracondylar ridge, the upper 2/3 of the lateral supracondylar ridge use origin to brachioradialis muscle, and the lower 1/3 of the lateral supracondylar ridge use origin to extensor carpi radialis longus muscle. The posterior surface of the lateral epicondyle use origin to and coneus muscle. Now these companies are attachments. Now very important nerves related to the humerus. This is the surgical neck. Surgical neck is the encircling constriction between the upper end and the shaft. The surgical neck is related to axillary nerve along with posterior circumflex humeral vessels. Then there is a radial or spiral groove, which is related with radial nerve. Along with radial nerve, the profunda brachii vessels are also related in the radial groove. Behind medial epicondyle runs the ulnar nerve. So this is a very important relation. Ulnar nerve passing behind the medial epicondyle. In front of the condyle runs a median nerve. So there are common places of fracture of the humerus. One is the surgical leg. Fracture of surgical leg will usually lead to damage to the axillary nerve. Fracture of mid shaft of the humerus will lead to injury to the radial nerve in the radial groove. And fracture of the medial epicondyle will lead to damage to the ulnar nerve behind the medial epicondyle. There is one more important fracture just above the condyle. Here, this fracture is known as the supracondylar fracture of humerus. In supracondylar fracture of humerus, the most commonly injured nerve is the median nerve, along with brachial artery. So these are the important nerves related to humerus, namely axillary nerve around the surgical leg, radial nerve in the spiral or radial groove, ulnar nerve behind the medial epicondyle, and median nerve in front of the condyle, that is a lower end. So this completes our attachments of the humerus. Thank you.